Hello, everyone, and here we are, week one. And so, just quick overview of what these videos are all about is that I'm really developing these as a companion to the weekly readings. There's being an online course, the readings become pretty critically important, but that's also true of all methods classes, whether you would take this in person or online. The reading and being able to reference back to readings that help you walk through the stages of research, that's always going to be important no matter how the instruction is delivered. I do want to go ahead and just start this week by calling your attention to one of the diagrams from the reading, and I like this diagram because it really separates out research into two stages: the planning stage and the execution stage. And maybe what I like most about this is that it shows the planning stage as being a longer, a larger segment of the process. And this is very true. We spend a lot of time in quantitative work coming up with what the variables are, how we're going to measure those variables, designing the overall structure of data collection, identifying who we want to collect information from. Again, kind of working our way through developing what relationships we're testing among these variables. And I know I just threw a lot at you, but that's kind of the process, and it's a little bit muddy in this planning stage. We're going to hopefully start breaking this down. Even later in this video, I'll start to break this down a little bit more, but I just want you to know that the planning stage is really important. The execution stage, I think, is tied directly to this, is that, certainly once we've gotten done with all this planning, that's where we actually carry out or go out and collect the data. But maybe an arrow that's missing on this is that one of the things we often forget to do in the planning stages is really focusing on the last bubble in the planning stage, that selecting the statistical test for resolving hypotheses. Before you ever go out and collect quantitative data, you want to understand what you're going to do with it, how you're going to analyze it, because you can really make it hard on yourself if you collect the data and then have to try and kind of back your way through, what statistical methods. It's actually how a lot of people end up in the trap of having to learn really obscure or complex and difficult statistical methods. A lot of what we'll be covering here in the class is pretty straightforward as long as you set up your study properly. So, all right, we'll go ahead and move on. We're going to talk about different types of research questions, and like I said, then I'll bring it back to some measurement issues. So, all right, the next two slides, I just wanted to go again. In the reading, it talks about 6 different types of research questions. And so, again, one of the questions that was asked here and also asked again in the reading questions was, is this level of statistics, is it variable depending on what you're trying to do, or are all quantitative research projects the same? And the answer is it's highly variable depending on what you're actually trying to do with quantitative data. And so this section again is another one of these characteristics of this reading, and this is why I picked it out, is they do a great job of breaking it down. And what I'm providing here is just an overview with an example of what each of these research questions is really all about. And I tried to be as simple as possible and focus in on this concept of time that youth spend outdoors. Here in the college, through our EE program, we have the No Child Left inside program here, and it's just something that caught my attention as I was going through the reading and pulling this up. But it comes back to descriptive is the very basic, the very simplest form of quantitative research, and we do it all the time, right? It's just trying to describe the frequency of observed phenomena. So how many hours a week do you spend outdoors, right? That'd be a research question. You count up how many hours a week a group of youth spend outdoors, and the individuals in a group of youth spend outdoors, and you could calculate a mean and understand the average number of hours a week they spend outdoors. And so that's something that they're, as we build through these, so explorative and evaluative, they start taking on different characteristics and getting more involved and more complicated. So explorative is really starting to look at understanding and identifying some of these relationships between different characteristics. So what characteristics or events relate to observed phenomena? So what are some of the influences, what influences how much time you spend outdoors? It becomes an interesting question. Evaluative might be again, looking at some kind of program or process or procedure and determining how well it worked. So evaluating different outdoor or after-school programs to see if involvement in one of these, had a greater increase in the time that you spent outdoors? Again, I'm trying to use this as a simple question here. All right, I'll go ahead and pick up on the next slide with the rest of these. All right, here on the second slide, looking at these types of research questions is where I start to think we really cross over into doing natural resource social science from a quantitative perspective. And the reason is that, you know, in most of these cases, we need more than just descriptive statistics to really understand what's occurring. And so predictive research questions start to, you know, look at some of these causal relationships, and so it's, you know, identifying what happens if one variable changes. And so an example here would be, do you spend more time outdoors if family income increases? The explanatory types of research questions are the one that I realistically spend the majority of my time with, and this is trying to understand you know, what factors are influencing some outcome that I'm evaluating. And so whether it be, you know, support for farmland preservation initiatives, which is something that I've been involved in the past, or understanding why farmers choose different land management practices, or in this case, understanding what factors, and this could be from a long list of different possibilities, membership in a group like Girl or Boy Scouts. It could be, you know, whether they live in a rural community or an urban community, whether they are active in other sports, you know, or active in organized sporting events. All, you know, these could all have an effect on how much time they spend outside. But what we're really asking in an explanatory model is which of these factors has the strongest influence on our dependent variable. So in this case, that would be on time you spend outdoors. And so these start to become really interesting and really fascinating questions when we're trying to understand something that we're observing, some observed phenomenon in the world around us. And then the last type here is where we start, and we'll talk about this later in the semester. Control research questions are frequently about their quasi-experimental designs. This is where we're actively going to manipulate some aspect of this, which experimental designs are very, very difficult in the real world that we do most of our work in, which we'll talk about what quasi-experimental means later in the semester. But just as a simple example here is, you know, when we're talking about control is, you know, talking about controlling or manipulating something or one variable to see if that causes a change in another variable. And so if one group of youth is provided with financial incentives, so if we give them cash to go spend more time outside, does that mean that they actually, you know, at the end of a set time period, will their actual time spent outdoors be greater than youth who are not provided with this incentive, right? And so again, we're trying to manipulate some variable to see if, in this case, financial incentives actually increase youth time spent outdoors. So again, this is a very broad overview of these different types of research questions, but what you'll see on this list, beginning back with descriptive, is you'll see a progressive increase in the complexity of the research question that we're asking here, and a corresponding increase in the level of complexity of some of the statistical analysis that will be done alongside this. Although that may be an overstatement, because even within descriptive statistics, there can be some fairly complex statistical processes used as well. So anyway, well, I'll go ahead and move on to the next question, but again, I wanted to stop and provide you with an overview of this and just use this example of youth time spent outdoors as a way of kind of introducing each of these types of research questions. Okay, real quick, just to add to this whole, you know, how does research question influence statistics? And so, you know, out of these 6 types of research questions that we were just discussing, the reading provides us with a quick table that kind of starts to show some of the types of tests that you would end up using. And so you look at this as that obviously a number of these we could actually approach using qualitative methods, right? So descriptive or explorative or even explanatory or evaluative and explanatory studies can be approached from using qualitative description or case study approach. But when we start moving into using representative samples, and so random samples from the population to understand these phenomena. You see that descriptive statistics again starts off as this very basic level. And so just to bring this up, Jeff asked on the discussion boards, to say it another way, if you have a quantitative research project, does the research design dictate the level of statistics you use? And I just wanted to put this out there that absolutely. I think this is exactly on point with what the reading's talking about this week. And so just wanted to put it out there. So is it possible to have no statistics in a quantitative research project, or is there some form of cookie cutter amount of statistics that is required for credibility? I'm not sure. I'm not sure you can actually do quantitative work where we're assigning numbers to observed phenomena or events or characteristics without some level of even of basic statistics. And so again, I think that's something I would add in there as well, is just that inherently statistics and quantitative research methods are bound together. All right, so this next slide I've really included because the measurement chapter that I included as a supplemental reading for this week has some very, very basic but very important concepts in it. And I just wanted to call your attention to these. And so in quantitative social science research methods, we're going to do a lot of measurement, right? And so just as a very broad overview of measurement, we're measuring a property of a person or thing when we assign a number to represent that property. That's the foundation of quantitative research. And we're usually using an instrument to make a measurement, right? And so we'll talk about what those instruments are as we move throughout the semester. But again, understanding that quantitative is about measuring and assigning some numerical value to the phenomena that we're seeing. And so one of the things they bring up in this text, in this measurement chapter that I provided as a supplemental reading, is that we call any measured characteristic a variable. Right? We're going to get into this a little bit more, right? There's lots of different aspects that come into this, everything from what's a construct to what's a operational definition of a construct, and what's a variable. At the basic level, what we're talking about are variables. And we'll get into more depth of how that relates to constructs here in a minute. I also want to bring up two other related topics, and so this chapter goes into more depth than I'd like on things like construct validity and statistical validity and internal validity and external validity of a measure. What I really want to talk about this week is just about validity, right? So at its core, what validity is it's a variable is a valid measure of a property if it's relevant or appropriate as a representation of that property. So again, if you have questions about this, post them up on the discussion board. Let's have the discussion. But for right now, let's leave some of the other forms of validity off the table, and let's just talk about validity as a property of measurement. And then the other one I wanted to bring up here is really about reliability. And so in quantitative research, we talk a lot about validity and reliability of our measures. And so at its core level, what we're shooting for with reliability is whether or not a measurement process is reliable if repeated measurement on the same individuals give the same or approximately the same results. And so again, reliability is about how confident we can be that if we were to give the same question or series of questions to an individual multiple times, would we get the same response from them each time? So there's lots of things that influence this, and it'll also come up time and time again as I talk about the development of scales and the measurement of latent constructs. So we're going to add a lot more complexity as we move forward throughout the semester, but I think we'll all get there. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and move on, but again, let's talk about validity and reliability, and especially as we continue to move on to next week, let's make sure that these topics are at the forefront of our discussion. All right, real quick, I just wanted to kind of go over, kind of a step back and take a big picture view of the reading this week. And really what the reading was talking about this week is that first off, we have to start with developing our research question, identifying what type of research question it is that we're actually trying to answer. We move from there to identifying and defining relevant variables. I'll talk more about the defining relevant variables portion here in just a minute. And then once we've identified and defined these relevant variables, we move into hypothesis development. Quantitative research is really about understanding relationships between two or more variables. And so hypothesis development is a critical aspect of quantitative research in that, prior to actually collecting the data, we actually state what these expected relationships are. And then we test those to see if our expectations are actually accurate. And so in a lot of ways, this hypothesis development is really something where what we're doing is we're just spelling out what those relationships are between variables of interest to our research question. And this really leads to identifying the role that each of these variables will play, whether it be a dependent, independent, or control variable. And again, we'll talk more about that as we progress throughout the semester, that notion of what's a dependent, what's an independent, and what's a control variable. But again, I just wanted to lay that out here when we can refer back to the slide as we need it throughout the course. All right, this presentation is getting a little bit longer than I was hoping for, so I'm going to cut this one pretty quick. We're going to spend a lot of time talking this semester about identifying and defining relevant variables. And I just wanted to put this out here that the process, and this is still unclear, and that's okay, the process is really about when we start to talk about variables, we tend to start very broadly talking about these variables, and so often we refer to those early variables, or where we're just getting into them, as concepts. Those concepts get refined into constructs, and those constructs ultimately become refined into operational definitions. And what we mean by operational definitions is how we actually intend to measure those variables. And so Krista provided some commentary on this on the discussion board, and I wanted to bring this up here. So it says a portion of her project will involve a survey of landowners on their attitudes on wind as a renewable energy source. So again, what she's got here is she's got the beginning of a concept, or even maybe a construct here, and what she's looking at is she wants to understand people's attitudes towards wind as a renewable energy resource. And so, that's the very beginning of a concept. That's where it comes from. To actually measure this, it still needs refinement. And so those are those next steps that would come out of this. And then I went ahead and included on there is that, starting to think through how you would actually use this data. So eventually this data can be generalized attributes about other landowners and determine who would be receptive, or a willing partner is a term that I often use here, to allowing a wind turbine to be constructed on their land, and at what price. This is a really interesting question, and again, this is about planning for how your data will be used long term, and so this should help drive your research question. The development of your research question is how you intend to use this information and share it with the public. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to your reading questions real quick, and we'll wrap it up for this week. Finally, I just want to go ahead and end the overview video this week by just giving you some examples of some reading questions from the past. And so these were based on week 1 readings in the past, and those readings, some of them have changed up a little bit and some of them haven't. But I thought it would be important just to, give you an idea of what it is I'm looking for. And when I say these 3 reading questions I want submitted to D2L, I want to know a couple of different things. One, I want to see that you've actually done the reading and that you're engaging with the reading. And 2, that you've put some thought into the question and that it's not just an easy yes/no answer to a reading question. And so, anyway, just ending the video here on week 1. We'll go ahead and pick up the discussion on the boards.